In Washington, D.C., there stands a building of marble and legacy. Within its halls, figures in black robes deliberate on the very fabric of American life, the Supreme Court of the United States. For over 2 centuries, this institution has been the final arbiter of justice, its members shaping the nation's destiny. For 232 of those years, the path to its 9 seats was defined as much by those who were present as by those who were absent. It was a path walked by 115 individuals, but never by a black woman. This is not simply a story about the 116th person to take that oath. This is the story of how history, struggle, and relentless determination converged in one person. It is the story of how a ceiling made not of glass, but of hardened tradition and systemic barriers, was finally broken. It is the story of a jurist forged in the crucibles of both the nation's most elite institutions and its most overlooked courtrooms. This is the historic, improbable, and ultimately triumphant ascent of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Our story begins not in the cold marble halls of Washington, but in the humid air of Miami, Florida. Ketanji Brown was born in 1972, Johnny and Ellery Brown, 2 people who embodied the Great Migration's promise of a better future. Both graduates of historically black colleges and universities, they had left the segregated South behind to build a life in education. They instilled in their daughter a foundational belief that education was the most powerful tool for advancement, and that service to one's community was the highest calling. The law entered Ketanji's life by osmosis. When she was just a preschooler, her father, a history teacher, decided to pursue his own dream of becoming a lawyer. Their small apartment transformed into a study hall. She would sit on the floor, quietly coloring, while her father sat at the table. Buried in casebooks, the dense language of torts and constitutional law becoming the background music of her childhood. The abstract concepts of justice and precedent were in the very air she breathed. Her name itself is a testament to her family's pride in their heritage. During a time when many were rediscovering their African roots, her aunt, who was serving in the Peace Corps in West Africa, suggested Ketanji Onyeka, which translates to lovely one. It was a name that carried a sense of identity and purpose, a daily reminder of a rich history stretching back long before America's founding. This sense of purpose propelled her. At Miami Palmetto Senior High School, she wasn't just a student, she was a force. She joined the debate team, and it was there, in the intellectual combat of high school oratory, that the future jurist was truly born. She learned to construct an argument, to anticipate a counter-argument, and, most importantly, to understand and articulate a perspective with which she might not personally agree. She learned that the strongest position is one that fully comprehends the other side. This training in disciplined, empathetic reasoning would one day prove invaluable under the brightest and most hostile of lights. But even with her talent, the world often sent reminders of the barriers she faced. When applying for college, with her sights set on the Ivy League, a high school guidance counselor offered a piece of well-meaning but crushing advice. Looking at her application to Harvard, the counselor warned her not to set her sights so high. It was a small moment, a casual lowering of expectations. But for the young Ketanji, it became a pivotal challenge. Instead of being discouraged, she felt a surge of resolve. It was no longer just a goal. It was a point to be proven. She would not allow someone else's limited vision to define her own. She not only got into Harvard, but she thrived. She delved into her studies, but also into campus life, engaging in student protests and even joining an improv comedy troupe, revealing a creative and spontaneous side to her methodical mind. Yet, life at Harvard was also a lesson in navigating worlds. She was acutely aware of her identity as a black woman in a space that had, for most of its history, excluded people like her. It was an experience that sharpened her intellect and her resilience in equal measure. After graduating with honors from Harvard and then from its prestigious law school, her path forward seemed clear. She embarked on a series of elite clerkships, the traditional apprenticeship for America's legal superstars. She clerked for Judge Patty B. Saris in Massachusetts and Judge Bruce M. Celia on the First Circuit Court of Appeals. Then, she achieved the pinnacle for any young lawyer, a clerkship at the Supreme Court of the United States. For the pragmatic and influential Justice Stephen Breyer. In the quiet chambers of the court, she learned from her future predecessor, absorbing lessons on judicial temperament, consensus, and the profound responsibility of the role. But then, Ketanji Brown Jackson made a choice that set her apart from nearly every other Supreme Court justice in modern history. She could have walked into any high-paying corporate law firm in the country. Instead, she chose to become a federal public defender. For 2 years, she worked in the trenches of the justice system. Her clients were not corporations or wealthy individuals. They were people accused of federal crimes who could not afford a lawyer. She represented the indigent, the forgotten, the people for whom the law was not an abstract theory but a terrifying reality. This experience gave her something no Ivy League education or prestigious clerkship ever could: a ground-level, human-scale understanding of the criminal justice system, its complexities, its flaws, and its immense power over individual lives. This chapter of her life would later become a central point of contention, but for her, it was a defining period of service. On February 25, 2022, history turned a page. With Justice Breyer's retirement, President Joe Biden stood at the White House and fulfilled a campaign promise. He nominated Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. The moment was electric, but the nomination was only the beginning. The path to confirmation would be a trial by fire. For 4 grueling days, the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings were broadcast to the nation. Judge Jackson sat alone at a table, facing a dais of senators, some of whom were determined to derail her nomination. The questioning was relentless. Her entire career was placed under a microscope. Opponents, unable to attack her impeccable credentials, sought to paint her as a radical, an activist judge who was soft on crime. They parsed her sentences in a handful of complex child pornography cases, taking her judicial decisions out of context and ignoring her adherence to the labyrinthine federal sentencing guidelines. They attacked her for her work as a public defender, representing detainees at Guantanamo Bay, misrepresenting her role as a defense attorney, a cornerstone of the American legal system's personal sympathy for her clients. In a moment that went viral for its absurdity, a senator pressed her to provide a definition for the word woman. The question was a political landmine, designed to trap her in a culture war debate. With a deliberate pause, she navigated it with the precision of a jurist. "Senator," she replied, "I'm not a biologist." It was a masterful display of judicial restraint, refusing to be drawn into a political fray that lay outside the purview of the law. Through it all, hour after hour of hostile questioning, of having her integrity questioned, and her record distorted, she remained a portrait of judicial temperament, poised, patient, and impossibly composed. She answered every question with exhaustive detail, drawing on her deep knowledge of the law. Her debate team training from decades earlier was on full display. Then, amidst the acrimony, the tone shifted. Senator Cory Booker, one of only 3 black senators, took his time to speak directly to her. His voice cracking with emotion, he pushed back against the attacks, choosing instead to speak of the joy and pride her nomination represented. "You have earned this spot. You are worthy," he declared. "You are a harbinger of hope. I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to let them steal my joy." His speech was a release, a moment that recentered the hearings not on the political attacks, but on the profound, historic weight of the occasion. It was a recognition of the journey, not just of one woman, but of a people. Finally, on April 7, 2022, the full Senate cast its vote. The final tally was 53 to 47. 3 Republican senators, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney, had crossed the aisle to support her confirmation, cementing her as a bipartisan appointee. It was done. The impact was immediate and profound. On June 30, 2022, Ketanji Brown Jackson took the 2 oaths of office. A black woman now sat on the nation's highest court. Her presence changed the institution instantly. For the first time, a justice brought the lived experience of a public defender to the conference table. This perspective was not just symbolic, it was substantive. In her very first term, during oral arguments in a critical voting rights case from Alabama, Allen v. Milligan, her impact was undeniable. While one side argued for a race-blind interpretation of the law, Justice Jackson countered with a history lesson, using the words of the 14th Amendment's own framers to argue that they were, in fact, trying to remedy racial discrimination. She used the logic of originalism to champion civil rights, reshaping the entire conversation in the room. Her legacy began long before her first written opinion. It began in the millions of homes across America where people watched her confirmation. It was visible in the tears of joy from older black Americans who had lived through the Jim Crow South, and in the wide-eyed wonder of young girls of color, who could now see their own faces reflected in one of the most powerful positions in the country. At a White House ceremony celebrating her confirmation, she stood before the nation and gave voice to the moment. "It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States," she said. "But we've made it. We've made it. All of us." In that moment, the we was expansive, including not just herself, but her ancestors, her mentors, her family, and every person who had ever been told their dreams were set so high. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's story is a powerful reminder that barriers are meant to be broken, and that the path to progress is long, arduous, and forged with unyielding persistence. From the little girl coloring next to her father's law books, to the determined debater, to the empathetic public defender, to the composed nominee, and finally, to the history-making justice. Her story is a quintessentially American story, and her presence on the court is a step towards a more perfect union. Whose American story of triumph should we explore next? Tell us in the comments below. And if you believe in sharing these important histories, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more documentaries. Thank you for watching.